I'm really excited to introduce Sherwin today. Sherwin is a friend and colleague. I've known Sherwin since 1998. We worked together at a startup in Boston. Most of what I know about selling, I've learned from Sherwin. Hopefully, some of that will rub off today. I know many of you are very deep and experienced sales professionals and marketing professionals, but I think there's a lot to be shared here today. Sherwin is I guess to sum it up, would be a 35-year veteran chief revenue officer. He's worked with both large enterprises and startup venture companies, two successful IPOs. One of these IPOs was, we just mentioned, Viant, where we met in Boston in the 1998, 1999 timeframe. Right now, I'm pleased to be working with Sherwin as a colleague at Revenue Architects. Again, I mentioned who we are a moment ago, but we're a management consultancy and marketing agency that assisting senior teams in achieving more accelerated, predictable, and sustainable revenue performance. So we look at a kind of the full life cycle of revenue across demand gen, sales, and customer impact. Sherwin is a particular expert in B2B high consideration selling and works with both product and services companies. In a minute, I'll turn it over to Rob to introduce the topic specifically, but I would begin by just sharing that the continuum, which is the theme for the day, it's a word we use every day at Revenue Architects. It's kind of a lingua franca in terms of how we think about revenue architecture strategy with our clients. And I think that'll come out as we go through the conversation today. It's Sherwin's presentation, but I might jump in one or two times to add a comment, but otherwise looking forward to hearing what Sherwin will share with us all today. Thank you. Rob, you want to take it?
Yeah, I get it. I have it from here, John. Thank you very much. And today's topic is revenue architecture alignment, a blueprint for effective marketing and sales. So just to set the context for those of you who are first-time CME listeners, we try to cover a broad range of topics that deal with the intersection of marketing and sales. And oftentimes we spend a good deal of time discussing programming. And when you're in the sales and marketing world, especially, what happens is there's a lot of shiny objects. And those shiny objects, we've had a couple sessions on AI, but we also realize that those of us who have revenue obligations, we have to do some of the fundamentals. And when we were discussing programming for our final session of the year, and I said it's been a great year. We've covered AI, we've covered positioning, all the great stuff. As John was talking, we said, John, you guys at Revenue Architects are doing some fabulous things. And maybe it was a sense of my own guilt. Having run sales, sometimes you just turn around and you beat everybody to death to hit your number. And when the topic of revenue architecture came up, I realized, oh my God, I burned a lot of oil along the way in efficiencies and everything else. So what Sherwin's going to be talking about is how different business models require entirely different revenue architectures. And we don't, as sales and marketing leaders, we don't think in terms of revenue architectures. And as we started going, and as both Sherwin and John went through, it's like, my God, this is efficiency. This is really getting a lot more efficiency out of your pipeline, stopping a lot of stuff falling off the pipeline, and really aligning it with sales objectives. So this is a powerful topic that doesn't get enough attention. And I applaud both Sherwin and John for covering this. So today, we've got an overview of what this means, how to apply it. So Sherwin, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, Pam, John, for the intro, and hello to all of the SAMI community. Can you hear me all right? And the slide is up. I just want to make sure.
Yep, perfectly.
Okay. This is kind of a meaty topic, and I know we're probably going to be short on time, so I think I'm going to move quickly, make the assumption everyone's got it, or I'll answer questions, but I want to be as interactive as possible. I think on this slide, I'm just going to pause for a second and make define two terms so the rest rolls clearly. First is revenue architecture. And really, revenue architecture is everything you do to build a predictable and sustainable revenue model. So whether it be your market strategy, your sales and marketing excellence, your revenue operations, your customer success team, anyway, it's the componentry of how you get to predictable and sustainable revenue. By alignment here, we mean alignment with your business model. So every business model requires some tailoring to its revenue architecture. for the revenue architecture. So whether it be B2B or B2C or demand subscription or various value propositions, really the business model is how you make money, your revenue streams, your cost structures, and those constraints, and the type of organization you'll have. So the revenue architecture and the business model need to be in alignment, and that's what this is about. So let me, let's see, is this moving? There we go. Okay. So let me clear for you this notion of the revenue architecture as it relates to the continuum of business architectures. Now, there's a lot of ways to draw a continuum of business architectures. This is simply an illustration of that. So you notice that the arrow there represents a continuum, and it's our view that on the extreme left-hand side of the continuum, there is a lot of brain cycles for sale, advisory, consulting, and as you shift right, you become more and more hardened, methodological, and frameworks in what you sell and do. And at the end, you would get to simple products. And along this continuum of your business model, we have to align that infinity diagram, which we use to represent the revenue architecture. So I'll just stop there and let you glance at it. And then say that I often make the claim that if you show me where you are on this continuum, you don't have to be in a box, but along the arrow, the continuum, I can help you define the appropriate revenue architecture. And we'll talk about what revenue architecture is a little bit more. But if you glance at the sort of the labels inside this infinity diagram, you'll get a sense for revenue. Predictable revenue is dependent on your revenue strategy. That's the reddish orangish stuff. There's somewhat dependent on your infrastructure, operating model, your brand platform, your revenue technology. And then the green are the programs, or think of it as the execution of demand and opportunity management and customer impact. Okay, so that's the infinity diagram. Let me add another component of clearing here. At the bottom on the left, you'll see low scale and high margins. And on to the right, you'll see high scale and lower margins. Just keep this in mind as you move across this continuum from left to right. Traditionally, the left-hand side is low scale. It's hard to find brain cycles for sale, right? It's like we've got to go find another genius. But it does come with very high margins. On the right-hand side, if you're selling sort of stamping out products, commodity or simple products, you generally can get to high scale easier, but the margins will erode over time as new competitors enter with similar features and functions. It's more easily replicable. Okay, so this represents the continuum, its key factors of margin and scale, and the infinity diagram, which is the revenue architecture. Okay, I'll let you just glance at that in a second. And I'll shift on. Now, this shift along these continuums is always on. It's not static. Firms are always shifting. You don't live in a place and stay there. Okay, so let me give you an example. I do work for a firm that sells networking servers. The networking servers are characterized by features and functions, by their ability to configure it, but it's a hardened asset that salespeople, a traditional sales force sells. Okay, new competitors enter. Their innovation curve is now compromised. It is now getting harder to scale, and their margins are eroding because it's a simple product sale or a complex product sale. They lean right on this continuum. So what they do is they go ahead and they invent some consulting wrappers. So they're now going to lead with not product, feature, function, but they're going to lead with a consultative wrapper. For example, network diagnosis and design. Once they switch and made that lead to shift left on the continuum, they lost the power of their traditional sales force. Their messaging now in demand generation is different. Their front-end offering, their value proposition has changed as they've shifted. And they chose to shift because the right-hand side was increasingly harder to scale and margins were being eroded. So that just gives you a quick example of how that might work. Now, why do business models shift all the time? And they do. I won't read this to you, but markets are always changing. Companies that are leaning to the left of that continuum are always looking to shift right to create greater margin and value differentiation, right? So we're in product, margins are eroding, Other competitors are entering, we're looking to shift left by creating value wrappers and consulting wrappers around it. Companies that lean to the left on the continuum are always trying to shift right to build more scale and standardization and repeatability in their business strategy, right? So if we have a big advisory, an example might be, how do I optimize my supply chain? Is a purely leaning left advisory sale that is usually done by the consulting luminary or the content expert. And the only way we're going to scale supply chain optimization is by hiring another expert. Not easy to do all the time, repeatedly. So we look to take the IP and harden it into frameworks as we try to shift right so we get more scale. The point of the matter is it's not static. Everyone is always shifting to gain either margin or scale.
Sherwin, so a question regarding, I think the viewers are understanding, the shifts in some models. There are going to be organizations that actually are addressing different markets. Are you folks also seeing different revenue architectures for different segments of a company's business?
Yes, and that's a great question, Rob. So a company can have their business segments or what do you call it, practices across this continuum. And it is the big question, right? Do you have one revenue architecture that can support something across the continuum? So that requires some tailoring. Or is it really true that in your company, one size of the revenue architecture will not fit all? That we need two separate models inside this company because we are on the left and shifting right, which requires its own model, and then something on the right. So you can get something like the product operating model, and you can get the advisory or consulting operating model that coexist. Okay. So there's a lot of challenges in aligning this board and investor expectations. I just recently worked for a company where they got their investment based on they lean right on the continuum. They're a product firm, happens to be a SaaS service, which is hardened, and we're going to stamp it out like cookies to people who need our service. However, in the real world, their go-to-market is highly consultative. In fact, most of it is bespoke consulting. So it's hard to stamp them out. But their investors think they bought scale, and actually this firm is selling go-to-market, and it's margin highly consultative-led. So just an example. There are always vested interests. So as we change who the real sellers are, there's always a current state sales force objecting. And there's a whole bandwagon, I'm sure everyone here knows, of standard models, which are already current initiatives or in play, which as we try to change, have their own vested interests and political map. Okay, is that clear? So let's return to the infinity diagram. This one's a little bigger. And let you glance at that and just say that this will change across the continuum left to right. So if you're looking at the value that you offer, on the right-hand side of the continuum, the productized hardened asset side, configuration and demo can play a big role. But your value on the left-hand side is probably consultative craft, content owners, frameworks and methods for delivering brain cycles in a more constructive way, right? Your markets, if you lean right, is probably more technical buyer, procurement, operations lead. Left is much more of the I'm the guy who. So when you lean left in the advisory side, in the demand gen is much more personal brand. We wrote the book on. I'm the guy who. It's much more personal brand and much less transactional. On the right-hand side, it's much more hardened, stamp it out, feature function, inbound, things like that. BDRs play a role on the right, much less on the left, if at all.
So Sherman, now that you brought up BDRs, this begs the question of the relationship between revenue architecture and sales methodology like MEDDIC, BANT, et cetera. How do they relate to one another, and how do you get those two aligned?
Yeah, so the sales method in this diagram would fit inside of the thing we've labeled opportunity management. So think of opportunity management here from lead identification through close, right? as the opportunity assessment, opportunity management, sales process place on this infinity diagram. It would include all of that. And so the sales process you pick is not dependent. That's inside that box, right? Whatever you choose, whatever methodology you choose, call it Sandler or pick your favorite, right? But who's exercising and how might change as you move across the continuum. But the actual assessment or qualification, let's say a band qualification or other, that would remain relatively the same, I think, maybe slight tweak, but it goes inside the opportunity management section.
Excellent. Thank you.
It's a subset. Anything else? Any other questions about this?
No.
And just note that it's drawn as an affinity diagram because they all impact each other, the revenue architecture. So how many times have I walked into a CEO's office who says, my sales team is terrible. We can't manage any opportunities. And I go to the sales team and they say, well, our demand generation doesn't provide us any qualified leads. And then I go to the marketing team who says, we don't generate any qualified leads because our value to market is not messaged well. So the question is, where are we really? It depends on where you sit inside that company as to what you think is the root cause. The point is it all has to be aligned in this revenue architecture. And that's why we drew it as an infinity diagram. Okay. Now we have 3 tables to illustrate how the various components of your revenue architecture would vary across the continuum. We could have picked a lot of things. We picked demand generation and sales and opportunity management and account management as examples. So let me move to the first chart. And this is a chart which shows demand generation and then how it shifts in terms of leadership, in terms of lead gen tactics, and BDR-based lead gen and nurture across the continuum. I'll let you glance at this, so I'm not reading it to you. I certainly don't want to go over all the bullets in this chart.
So, Sherwin, this begs the question, as we look at the chart and we look at the bullet points, we realize that many of those bullet points are in different organizations. So some in marketing, some are sales, and one could argue some are in, possibly customer service. So 2 questions. One, who's sitting at the table when the revenue architecture is being defined? And 2, how often should organizations look at realigning their revenue architecture?
Okay. Well, the first one, and then I'll ask John if you want to chip in there, John, but who should be at the table? Which is really everyone involved in the revenue generation process, right? It's not really a function. So-and-so doesn't generate revenue. There's some team of marketing, customer success, sales support, sales excellence that has to come together to generate. For example, if you're doing an ABM campaign, you wouldn't say one function does it, right? You would say at least 2, marketing and sales do that. So who comes to the table? Is generally for us, it's the revenue generation mind meld of your senior leadership team.
Yeah,
John, do you want to add to that?
I just had one thing, which is one of the reasons we called the 3 green boxes on the prior slide the way we did. Demand gen is not marketing. Opportunity management is not sales. Customer impact is not sales or marketing. Those are cross-functional processes and capabilities to drive predictable and sustainable revenue performance that's cross-functional, right? Surely demand gen is primarily a marketing-led activity, but it's clearly sales and integrated. And ABM is a perfect example. Opportunity management is probably mostly sales-driven, but there's a lot of enablement and marketing capability that supports that. And customer impact, similarly, maybe is account management-driven, but clearly cross-functional. So we're trying to take away this notion of organizational models against this, but really make them more of a process model, and then have recognition of that, mind meld, if you will, the cross-functional melding. Yep.
So, John, that begs the question: is there measuring this? I mean, we can measure, we can use revenue, or we can use aspects of pipeline, as they can be used as KPIs. So when are there as we're measuring this, because I know you mentioned at one point, Revenue Architects is measuring some things. How do you know when and what are you measuring?
Yeah, and Chairman jump in, but if I follow the question, I mean, one of the things we try to do is look at a full funnel math. I don't know if that's just a word we use, but funnel math, but looking at it in a full funnel context. So understanding the implications based on target outcomes we need. You know, usually that based on average deal value, you can translate obviously into the number of closed sales we need in a particular type of segment of the business. We can back up obviously into the demand gen funnel and see kind of the lead flow we need and the metrics and KPIs, you know, to the left and then to the right from a retention and expansion standpoint. So we can kind of get a sense of KPIs from a full funnel perspective. I'm not sure if that, Rob, answers the question or.
Yeah, I think, and John, that does. So I think for folks on the call that are looking to take this revenue architecture approach, they may have to do a little bit of get their sales op or marketing ops teams to let's make sure we've got the funnel, visibility correct.
Yes.
Yeah, funnel math is purely a measurement of your funnel and what it looks like and how it's shaped, right? In terms of number of leads you need and how they convert through the pipeline and your average deal size. And eventually you get to the mathematics that says, given all of that, we need 30, or whatever that number is, or 300. So that's really in the green, mostly the funnel math.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason you may have to get so many leads is because you don't have the value proposition, which is sticky, right? So clearly, if you were leading with, we have a cure for cancer, you probably can predict that you don't need as many leads because people will call and have a high propensity to buy and they're in the buying moment, right? So it's a little less scattershot. So just coming back to this, without reading the table, just in general principle, as you're leaning left on this continuum, it's less of a numbers game, right? Less transactional as you're leaning left in your demand generation. Left is more content and consulting craft. It's marketing and marketing thought leadership. It is nurturing relationships when they're not in the buying moment. How do we add value? We're not transactional. We need a whole nurture program for senior executives, generally on the left, who are not in the buying moment, but we can add value in the interim. It's mostly relationships, and content expertise is king as you lean left. As you lean right on the continuum, generally you're in a more traditional selling process. Okay, and I'll tell you a story of that. Sales activity is king on the right. If you got 100 calls, make 200. As you go to the extreme right, okay, activity becomes king. Words like demos and pilots start to seep in. BDRs as appointment setters become relevant. You can even be in an event with a booth, and that becomes relevant as you are on the right. So really the whole way of approaching the market becomes somewhat different.
Hey, Sherwin, as you were, as we were prepping for today and you presented this chart, it made me think like, this is kind of like those bumpers when you take a kid bowling, right? It's like, okay, where are my guidelines here? So if you're in more leaning to the right and you have a CEO who's talking about their personal brand and their thought leadership, like that being the secret sauce to selling, or vice versa, right? You get somebody who wants a demand gen machine, but they're on this like highly advisory consulting. So to me, this was like a super interesting checklist of alignment, right? And maybe just kind of putting as you said, this is always a continuum. Things are always shifting. As you're leaning one way, as you're leaning another way, it's a good reminder of the tactic mix, again, as a marketing leader, that we need to think about. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. Does that seem like a useful interpretation?
Yes, that's exactly right. You don't want to be a left-hand leaning go-to-market firm with a right-hand leaning demand generation program. You will actually see exactly what happens. And it's those takeaways that I've learned to spot with my you're out of kilter antennas.
Yeah,
right?
can I throw one story in on that one?
Please
One of the clients we work with, we were introduced and they were fully invested in inbound marketing. It was like, the thing. I mean, obviously that's the mantra in the last 10, 12 years or so. And they jumped on the bandwagon and it wasn't working. They spent $1 million on building an inbound platform. And of course, every firm needs some level of solid inbound, but when we dug into it, we realized that in the world, in the entire world, this company likely only could sell their offering to 1,000 companies worldwide. That's the TAM that they were essentially facing off on. So really, their whole mindset around just jumping into the bandwagon of inbound on the right side of this continuum didn't fit their offering at all. They really needed a highly targeted ABM, account by account, sales driven ABS type of program, and it was just a massive shift. And you start to realize, well, how could you not see that? Some of it's forest of the trees, but it's because there's these assumed models. Oh, we all need inbound. That's the future, but it really depends on the business model, obviously, as Sherwin is outlining.
That's a great example, John. Yeah, it's because people get enamored with the shiny object. They go to, HubSpot inbound and they're like, I need an inbound strategy, even if it doesn't apply to their business.
Yeah,
It'll
John.
align with the business model, exactly to our point.
Yeah, and John, jumping in on John Russo chimed in. We're talking about, there's a side dialogue on this diagram, is that maybe you want to even add routes to market. How do routes to market affect this as well? Because each one requires a different route, or is that implied? And why haven't you been more explicit with routes to market?
Is that to John?
Either you guys.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of capture it here in lead gen tactics. You kind of mix the tactic with the route. I was just thinking, and it's hard to fit it all in, right? Like,
Right.
We all present to executives, so it's really hard to put as few words as possible. But I do think the route to market could impact your lead gen tactic in a pretty significant way.
Certainly could. Certainly would. Okay. So that's the lean light. Let me go to this slide, which is about sales and opportunity management. This is the one that personally I wrestle with the most. I mean, in a good, positive way with clients, right? It's this one, which is how do we manage opportunities and how we organize to do that? And I want to just spend a minute to clear this slide just a bit, and then I'll tell you one story. So when you are leaning left, the leadership is generally the luminary, right? The person who, I'm the expert in retail banking, if you will, etc. And as you codify that advisory or brain cycles into consulting practices, you end up with practice leads. And as you go left on here, you get more towards the typical sales organization. The New York sales branch might be an example.
You mean right? Yeah, I think you meant right.
I mean right. I'm sorry, I meant right. So look at the org model for a second. Under the advisory consulting is generally done with a staff pyramid. In fact, a lot of advisory firms are really partners that are joined together by a business card and a health plan, and they build their own pyramids, right, of go-to-market. And the shape of that pyramid would indicate the profitability of what they do, right? That's the staff pyramid that they deploy. And I'll let you just look through this. That's a high base. Cut of the pyramid margin is when they're paid. That's how they're paid. So now let's just go towards the right. When you're in consulting practices, generally the sellers are the subject matter experts. Remember, content is king the more left you lean. So we say the sales force, but we don't mean the typical sales force. We mean a sales force that is really the subject matter experts. Okay. And this can be very, very challenging for firms that are in consulting practices or consulting-led solutions even, which is they have content experts selling because they know the stuff. The client doesn't need a guy with an order pad hanging over his shoulder, right? He wants the content, but they often lack good sales process skills, right? So here I am at one of the big companies I work for, and they're a big consultancy. You would know them immediately, one of the big 8. And in walks Mary. She's in charge of our retail banking practice, and she's been hunting down a $5 million opportunity for a trust accounting system replacement at a major bank. It's been stalled. And she really is a SME, but in this case has no sales process advisor. So she says to me, this business is going to close, Sherwin, this quarter. I said, Mary, that's great. What makes you think so? And she says, well, I was in a meeting with all the guys there who know what they need, and I blew them away. I was the smartest person in the room. Now, that's not a sales discussion. She is acting like a typical consulting person. I was the smartest. They had questions, I had answers, right? But if I asked Mary, great, let's get it. Do you know if they have budget and who releases that budget? If I asked her, do we have any competitive threats? What about the compelling reason to act? What if they don't do this at all? What happens that's bad and to whom? Right? What about the political map? What happens if they go ahead with this? Who jumps out of the closet? What boogeymen are we faced with then in the political map? And she doesn't have any of those answers because all she knows is she's really smart about trust accounting. And they are going to ask her for the order. You follow? So the only way out of that is to combine a sales process advisor connected to these SMEs. But the SMEs are the sellers. They're the real salespeople in this, but they need the sales process advisor. So that's the way you would read this across. We won't have time for me to, I just wanted to point out one so you get to sort of the flow or the zen of it. And as you move right, you get solution SMEs, probably more tightly coupled to a solution salesperson. Why? Because as you move right, the assets are increasingly hardened. You can train others. They're more scalable, right? And I'll let you glance as you move right on that org model line and see if there are any other questions, in which case I'll answer them. But
Yeah,
this
sure,
is the way that works. Yep.
Sure, when your example about Mary, poor Mary, is fantastic. So I guess the challenge then is how do organizations, if you're in there, you can recognize and you can point the finger. Are organizations self-aware enough to realize this, using the situation with Mary as an example?
No.
Look, Mary, you need some help.
No, because even in this example, they might have something they call a sales force, which we'll call them the typical sellers, sales process owners, right? And we think they're responsible for the quota. And in fact, the sales organization has to submit a forecast. But if I ask the salespeople, where do you get your forecast, your confidence in the probability of close and the value of it? They say, we get it from the SMEs, because the SMEs are really the real salespeople. You see what I'm saying? So
Exactly.
yeah. So in other words, if I walk in and I say to the sales leader who's having trouble, the typical sales leader, hey, how do you get your forecast? He says, well, I get it really from the subject matter experts who are the real salespeople, in quotes. Then I know you're misaligned. Anyway, just an example to sort of add to your try to put some color on your question. So I'll let you glance at this. There's a lot in this slide. Obviously, I guess everyone gets these slides, so you can read it, but you get the sort of the flow of it. Notice on the extreme right, you have a real core sales team, but it's all dotted line to sales support, because to the extreme right, it's fungible sales support. It's so hardened. I don't mean it in lieu of personal relationships. Some people prefer others. But as a modeling standpoint, I'm a salesperson. I need support on the extreme right. If Mary's available, she can help me. If Tom is available, he can help me. If Tony is available, he can help me. In other words, it's a dotted line sales support group. Okay, and that's the way you would read this. A lot to be said about this, especially if you're in many places across the continuum. Right, we won't be able to do it all there. The last slide is around customer impact and account management. By customer impact, we don't mean delivery. We mean that the customer now becomes an advocate for you, that you can expand the relationship. You can sell new services to the existing DMU or decision-making unit. You can transfer to other buying centers. You can add more seats to what you're already doing. The customer will advocate for you internally, externally, maybe with quotes on the website. That's what we mean by customer impact. John, do you want to add a thought to that? As anything I missed there?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah.
And just the same sort of, you know, Zen here as you move from left to right. Once again, we won't have, in the interest of time, we're not going to go through each of these cells, but you can see under expansion is crop rotations, colonizations. This is, we sell 3 things, but our client has only bought one of those things. How might we sell the same decision-making unit or buying center, the other 2 things? Right? Or how do we move to a new buying center? Colonization. And that the process of doing that is all about designing the right account plan, the teaming between content owners and relationship owners and sales advisors, and then the opportunity plan, etc. So expansion is key. There are a lot of clients that I speak with that say, our strategy is we're going to land quick and cheap and expand. And they never do.
So you touched upon, and I'm not sure if this is on the hype continuum or, and it's probably something we're going to revisit during next season's SAMI programming is, we talk a lot about customer-led growth, and it tends to be, and we heard from a couple of folks, they're at their board meeting and one of the board members said, oh, one of our other portfolio companies is all about customer-led growth and blah, blah, blah. Where does customer-led growth fit on the infinity diagram?
I would say under customer impact.
Okay.
I'll let John correct me if that's not the case, but I think it's under customer impact in that customer-led growth, I think implies there that the relationship is somewhat self-sustaining. You have gotten the right advocacy in the buying unit you're in or across buying units or even, to other divisions, other business units, etc. So I think of it as there. John, do you have a different?
Yeah, and I think it relates to the 3 C's you mentioned, right? There's the continuation, customer-led continuation. I'm going to continue the services or the product delivery or the SaaS that I'm delivering now. I'm going to continue and retain that client relationship or customer relationship. I'm going to colonize by moving from division A to division B to division C. I'm going to crop rotate by cross-selling our products to the existing. So that's customer-led growth versus product-led growth is be more right on the continuum where I'm upselling in the product or I'm adding feature function within the product, probably to the same buyer, same DMU. That would be more product-led growth as I see it.
Rob, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. And there's a lot of interesting things in here. I mean, retention. When you're at the far left of this continuum, you're an issue-based consulting, right? What's your issue? And you have to be, the consulting craft is the dialogue, the give and take of that issue until you can form the value proposition essentially at the table at the whiteboard. And so discovering new issues and how to bring them forward is always an important part of retaining clients. Right.
So,
yeah, sure.
Hey, Sharon, I got a question and this is great segue into retaining clients. So in the SaaS model, typically lifetime value is 6 to 8 times, six to 8 years. Yet customer success is being crushed right now in the market, where you've got some major companies like ServiceNow that are saying customer success is a complete waste of time and we're going to completely eliminate it from our budget. Where do you stand on when it comes to customer success with a 6 to 8x lifetime value, where companies are so focused on trying to eliminate churn?
Well, so that's a tough question. I think it's a good question. I think if you have a 6 to 8 year or customer lifetime value, that's pretty good to start with. I think the only way there to prevent churn is through, on the right, more innovation of what you're selling. In other words, if you're static in your offering, then it will run out of time and probably customer success is limited because eventually it matures in the client's ability to get value from it, right? But the best companies that I've seen that maintain relationships, especially like in a SaaS or a right-leaning offering, is the constant state of innovation to the existing DMU. In other words, staying ahead of the value you can provide to the client, the perceived value, certainly.
Yeah, more product led. Yeah.
More product led. So you see on the right here, well, I can't see it because your faces are in the way, but you'd see sort of innovation becomes important in selling. So where on the left-hand side, it's more what issues are emerging, trends, markets, you have to deliver new value. And I think that really becomes the basis for good customer success, CLV long term.
Got it.
I mean,
Thank you.
just steady state, 6 to 8 years, pretty good. But the market will erode you there unless you are innovating. Is that fair, Dave? Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So let me move away from the tables and just say to some early warning signs to watch for. And what we mean is early warning signs that misalignment exists. Now, I've got 2,000 of these, but I'm sharing 5 here. Okay. So we want scale, but most of what we deliver is custom. I see this all the time. Why aren't we growing quicker? But everything we do in our selling is highly bespoke. That's a misalignment. Okay. I think I mentioned this one before in my sort of my tongue-in-cheek storytelling, but we get our forecast from our consultants, implementation and customer service team. We have confused the real sellers with who we call our sales team. So who is the sales team becomes a question here. And when that's not that clear, you're out of alignment. And when I say out of alignment in the infinity diagram, and it affects everything, right? We just hired a bunch of BDRs, and they're not providing expected volume of appointments. Well, where are you on the continuum? If you're on the left, BDRs have no role. Nobody who's looking for advisory work is appointment setting with somebody who has two questions to ask them. Right? On the extreme right, where it's very more transactional, yes. So I hear that all the time. We built this BDR function. It's not working. Why? Because it's not aligned to where we are in the business model continuum. Our sales cycle is front-ended with a wide array of expensive consultative sessions. That would sort of mean, I've asked many clients this question: are you a product and hardened services company, or are you a consulting company? Can you tell me which one you are? No, we're a services company. We're SaaS. It's product. But yet they're front-ended by a wide array of highly bespoke consultative services. Okay. And I'll let you read the last one. I won't go through it, but these are just some early warning signs. Like I said, probably have 1,000 of these that are built into my Sherwin watch antenna system.
Yeah, Sherwin, I think your comment about the BDRs on the left-hand side of the continuum, the consulting area is a really big deal. I see a lot of organizations kind of going down that path as, even as, consulting and advisory-led services growth stalls a little bit. And so they're kind of going there. So I guess the question for you is, okay, we're on the left side of the continuum. Market dynamics are a little bit odd, and they're going to throw BDRs at it, which, I think you just nailed it, is going to fail. What do you then advise? Okay, we're stalled. We're stalled, Sherwin, on the consulting advisory side. What do we do?
Yeah, the typical look. Everything is a little account specific, right? But let me give you the general answer that if you're on the left, leaning left, and you've stalled, either you have to hire more of those guys or gals, or you have to increasingly commercialize and harden your assets and shift right on the continuum.
Sure.
Big options, right?
I have a quick question. This is fascinating. I read a survey a few weeks ago that said, most people, 18% of people like salespeople, but most of them don't. And I'm wondering if it depends on the kind of business that you're in, right or left, because I want to talk to someone that's an expert. Don't waste my time. It's fascinating.
On the left, that would be exactly right. Content is king, and the seller really is that who can apply the content and the consultative craft to the issue at hand, right? The last thing the client wants there is a guy with an order pad. Now, by the way, teaming on that left side is not easy, because if you attach the sales process owner, the content owner has to figure out a way to keep that sales guy in the loop so that they can use their sales process expertise, right? And if they're not kept in the loop, then eventually they will lose their place at the table. And I will lose the value of bringing together content owner and sales process owner on the left-hand side. The way they decide how to work together to achieve both content expertise and sales process expertise is the nature of this opportunity plan. And I leave that up to the team. But you must do it. Otherwise, the salesperson on the left, not on the right, on the left, will vanish. Mark, is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I always think about, the implications of AI, that the real job is to almost get rid of salespeople to the extent that it can. But you always, once you find that person that's the real expert, you'll never let go. Maybe that speaks to the, to the lifetime value of that relationship based on, what products you're selling. So.
Well, somebody has to be able to do the sales process questions. What is the nature of the political map? Who is friend or foe? Now, this is a comfort zone issue and a style issue, and there are good ways to try to uncover the nature of your political foes and friends, and then there are bad ways to do it, right? And I just don't know if AI will have that touch and feel. I'm no AI expert, but I don't know if it has the touch and feel to be able to traverse some of those more human issues. Like, I'm against you. Why? What you could do is great, but you might displace me here, right? It's not part of my promotion track. So that's much more of a touch feel thing than it is knowledge thing, right? So, all right, quickly, and I think we're on time. Some takeaways. Do we have a need to shift along the continuum? And I think that we do always have a need. I've made that case, but we need to make that strategic objective clear. Okay, we're shifting from the right to the left to gain more scale by adding more consultative value to differentiate ourselves from the other feature function providers who are breathing down our neck. All right, but that means we're making a shift. Now the question is, what is our value proposition revised? What do we have to track in terms of KPIs in the funnel? We're now leading with something else. How do we team sales process expertise and content? With what marketing campaigns now differ? And I could run around that whole infinity wagon wheel and say, we have to make the objective clear. Often we don't, right? Plan your business model shifts concurrently with the corresponding revenue architecture shifts. Really, 1 and 2 can go together here. I'll let you read, but you really have to speak to the teams. They really understand how this will impact the whole. If you're making a strategic shift, let's say at the senior leadership team level, there is a decision to be made. We need greater deal value. Why do we need greater deal value? Because our margins and deal size for the product feature function is declining or eroding. We have to protect those margins with greater deal value. For example, how do we get greater deal value? We're going to add more consultative wrapper. You can speak to your team. They will know how that is going to impact you, right? In terms of actually doing it in the field. So I'll hold off there. That's about as much, I think, as we can do, Rob, Pam. And, it's 7 minutes before, and I think you wanted to add some questions in, or you tell me. I'll respond any way you think is appropriate for the
Thank you, Sherwin.
cadence here.
And I'll add some commentary to this final slide, and I'd like your response to it. So I work a lot with organizations that have recently fired either their head of sales or their head of marketing, but we'll focus on head of sales for a minute. And I would argue the data, with data points and everything else, that and people can challenge me, that oftentimes when you're getting rid of your head of sales, it's a mistake, and that organizations don't recognize it. There could be a number of contributing factors. And I'm going to argue, based on our discussion today, that lack of alignment that you've discussed is a huge issue. And as we said at the beginning, that lack of alignment has multiple owners. And
Right.
when you turn around and you torpedo your head of sales, okay, and look, any organization, some people aren't the right fit, but I argue oftentimes that they are, and I've seen great heads of sales lose their job. So you get rid of that person, you're not only dealing with the impact of a sales leadership change, which could change the sales model and everything else, as we discussed earlier, but at the end of the day, if it's misalignment in the revenue, in revenue architecture,
Right.
then you're back to square one again.
Right.
What do you advise?
Well, I advise, it's what I always advise, which is if we know where you are on the continuum, we can design your entire model.
Perfect.
Right. And I'm being a little flip when I say that. It's not as easy as that. But if we can tell me where you are. So if you're leaning left and you have this group called the sales force that you think owns the client relationships and that you think is going to close the business, I would tell you that it's really the content owner that's going to do that. Right. And that you need to align your sales force almost as an advisory function to the subject matter experts. Accountable, but as an advisory function. Right. And the thing that will join them together is the artifact you invent, the account plan, the opportunity assessment, the joint plan. And I would have advice for both partners, the content owner and the sales process owner, in the best practices for doing that, which we can't really cover now. But I would say once you fire that sales leader, you have basically said the sales process itself is not critical to the sale. Those are real skills. Right? With what budget are they buying? With what compelling reason to act? With what underlying business case? With what mitigation of competitive threats? That is really not just, I'm an expert in trust accounting, correct? Right. So we have to bring those things together in that organized way. And here I'm on the left side of the continuum, right? But you can't do away with somebody has got to be in charge of selling. And even if we say it's the subject matter expert, I can guarantee you they're married.
Yeah, fair point.
Right.
Yeah.
On the right-hand side, sometimes the issue is activity management. We're just not making enough calls. Why aren't we making enough calls? Well, we're making sufficient calls, but my return is very low. I call 200 people, only 3 say they want to even meet. What's wrong with your value proposition?
Exactly.
What's wrong with your segmentation? Do you have the right personas with the right pain points and constructive messaging? Do you have that? So once again, John and I would take them around that track. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and that's perfect. And that's gonna wrap us up. And I'm gonna make a comment and then turn it back over to Pam. First off, on behalf of everybody here today, I want to thank you, Sherwin and John, not only for spending the time to cover this important topic, but the thought leadership to actually put this together. And I think, I'll challenge everybody on the call. I think take a hard look at your your revenue architecture and look for alignment issues before you do anything radical. So on behalf of everybody, I want to say thanks. But Pam has a couple of closing thoughts if you want to stick around for a couple minutes as we wrap this up. Pam, back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Rob. And let me just add my thanks to you, Sherwin, as well. Just great session, great, useful. I'm going to keep those bumpers in mind as we think about, how this applies to our businesses. And that's always a hallmark of a SAMI session, right? Stuff you can start to think about and apply and use right away in your own businesses. The recording will be available in Meetup soon. So if you signed up via Meetup, you will get an alert about that. And that will have the link. And we'll have to figure out how to post the slides as well. We don't always do that. But I think in this case, the slides are so valuable. We'll make sure that that's the case. And as we said a couple times, this is the last session of our SAMI programming for summer. So school is out for summer. We will be back in September, and watch the Meetup group for announcements of new sessions. If there are topics and speakers that you want us to cover, please let one of us know on the EC. we're happy to chase down those particular speakers or find people on those topics. There's always so much interesting stuff going on, and we've got some interesting stuff in the works for the fall. Thanks again for joining us today.